that it allows for carbon to build up over time. Hey guys, welcome back. Steve here with 6 Star Automotive. I am stoked about today's episode. This presentation is actually the reason I started doing YouTube videos. I had so many customers give me positive feedback about talking about this specific subject that they said that I should do these, so I did. As usual, before we get started, please like, subscribe, and follow me as we talk about the fuel induction service. So if you haven't seen my video on piston rings, check it out. If you have, you'll remember that I talked about the carbon that can build up on the inside of your engine. This service is actually specifically designed to help alleviate that. Let's take a look at what we got. So this is a typical port fuel injection system. So they call that because it injects the fuel into the intake port. It actually does it for every individual cylinder. The fuel injector sprays fuel behind the intake valve into the airstream, which allows it to mix into the combustion chamber and be burned and go out the exhaust. As you can see here, what ends up happening is because this intake valve is so much colder because of the fuel and the cold air that comes in past it, that it allows for carbon to build up over time. Partly because when you shut the engine off, some of your intake valves are going to remain open, and like we talked about in the oil video, oil is volatile, so it will evaporate. So as the engine's really hot, the oil's really hot, and that oil vapor will actually work its way up past the rings, and it will get up into the combustion chamber and subsequently up into the intake manifold. But it will condense on the cold components, like the valve and like the intake assembly up into the throttle body. So we have a service that is actually designed to clean this. The reason that you want to do this, one of the main reasons, is that this carbon will actually start to build up so much that the carbon chunks will break off, and then they can get lodged inside of the valve seat. If that happens, you actually can get, if you check here, you can actually get what's called a burned valve. So it'll sit in the valve seat and it'll hang the valve open, which will then prevent the sealing of the cylinder and in essence create a blowtorch effect that will burn the valve. So what we try to do is keep all this clean so you don't have the restriction of air going past the valve, causing pumping losses and lack of efficiency and that potential burned valve situation. You're probably asking why it doesn't actually build up on the exhaust valve, and it's a very good question. The exhaust valve, because it has all that hot air going past it all the time, is considerably hotter than the intake valve that's constantly being sprayed with fuel and getting cooled by air. It never gets that on this side, so it stays so hot that the carbon doesn't actually stick to it. Another thing that happens is you can see over here on the clean side, the fuel injector actually is spraying, it's atomizing, and that's what it's supposed to do. That's actually very good. But what will happen is as the buildup accumulates on the intake components, it'll actually accumulate on the nozzle of the fuel injector and causing it to spurt and spatter rather than to atomize. And that will cause the fuel to not be in the smaller droplets as it should be and then cause less efficient combustion. Depending on how long it's been since you've done this last, it actually may take a couple of these services just to get you kind of back to where you should be. It's recommended that we do this about every 15,000 miles. Manufacturers like Ford and GM are actually recommending these services every other oil change now. Most cars since the late 2000s actually have what's called direct fuel injection, or GDI, or direct injection. So what they mean by that is that rather than spraying the fuel into the intake stream, they spray the fuel directly into the combustion chamber. This is much more efficient, but it's also much more complicated. So you have like about 2,000 PSI going on in here. So you have to have high pressure fuel pumps. You have to have very high quality seals to keep that combustion inside instead of blowing past that fuel injector. It also means that the fuel injector itself is subject to a lot more stress, a lot more heat, a lot more everything. So it ends up being more expensive to produce and subsequently more expensive to maintain. But it does offer considerably better fuel economy. One thing that you'll note though, is nothing actually spraying any kind of fuel, which fuel has detergents in it, so no cleaning of the back of the valve itself. So what actually becomes very common is intermittent misfires in direct injected cars, because this carbon will just build up and build up and build up until it gets to the point where it slows down the air so much and prevents the valves from sealing that it will actually cause misfires. With direct injected vehicles, it is crucial that you do your fuel induction services on time and often. One thing I always tell my customers, and I've been telling you guys from the very beginning, I'm not trying to just sell you stuff. I'm actually trying not to sell you expensive stuff, right? I mean, if you let these valves go to the point where you have misfires, you can have burned valves, and then we're pulling the head off, right? We don't want to pull the head off. If we can do this chemically and we can keep this clean and we can keep you on the road without having big, giant, expensive repairs, that is our goal. I just want you to fully understand kind of what you're dealing with and how we can keep you on the road. So you might ask, why have I never really had to deal with this kind of stuff before? Just like I talked about in my piston ring video, in order to get the kind of efficiency that we demand out of our vehicles, we've had to make the engines smaller, lighter, and more fragile, basically. So the valves are smaller, the pistons are smaller, their piston rings are smaller, and we're actually getting more power out of that as well. So, because the spray pattern that comes out of these injectors is specifically designed to go a very certain way. These pistons have a small little pocket where that combustion event happens and allows you to run a much leaner mixture. But that means that that spray pattern must be just right in order for it to work. So like I talked about earlier in the video, one of the things that we do with our fuel induction system cleaning is clean the throttle body. If you look here, the throttle body is actually a butterfly valve that allows air into the intake system. Fun fact, when you hit the gas pedal on your vehicle, you're actually hitting the air pedal. What that does is it opens the throttle body and lets air in. You're not actually adding fuel yourself, you're adding air. The vehicle then interprets that and adds the fuel on its own. What can happen over time is that this will actually get gummed up and built up with dirt and carbon. These throttle bodies are designed to be fully closed and have a specific metered leak. As the carbon builds up around that sealing area, the computer has to compensate for that by opening the throttle body more and more as it's closed. What can happen then, if you lose battery voltage, you will lose your adaptions and then your car won't want to run anymore. It'll stall because the computer goes back to its original setting of this fully closed and then no air can get past it. So keeping that throttle body clean, which is a byproduct of doing the fuel induction service, can prevent stuff like that from happening. All right, guys, that wraps up this series on preventive maintenance. I have so many more for you. So please subscribe, stay tuned so you can get the next one. And come on by to experience a 6-star difference for yourself. Oh my goodness, can I catch it, please?